Hi, my name is Steve Ehrman. I'd like to talk to you today about colleges and universities and the challenge they have at trying to improve the quality of learning, equity of access, and affordability when there are demands to improve all three simultaneously. So I'm going to be talking about some of the findings from a book I've written called Pursuing Quality, Access, and Affordability, a field guide to improving higher education. The context for the research I did, one way to think about it is the widespread belief in the late 20th century, sometimes labeled the iron triangle, which is the belief that you can improve institutional quality or access or affordability, but only by sacrificing one or both of the others. Improve quality, that's elitist. You're concentrating resources, fewer people can get access. Improve access, you're almost certainly watering down standards. Improve either one, you've got to spend more money, and affordability suffers. A lot of presidents believe that, at least in a study that was done in 2008. And yet I'm going to guess that most of their institutions at that time were engaged in a variety of small initiatives, many of them transient, usually uncoordinated with each other. Some were dedicated to improving quality, others to extending access, and a third group to improving affordability. All these being done by different people. And again, I'm going to guess in the long term, they might not together produce any appreciable gains in quality or access or affordability. At that time, accreditors rated institutions' quality by their resources. For example, the caliber of their faculty, the expensive facilities that they might have, the SAT scores of entering students. Now, in that context, improving quality, access, and affordability could be done conceptually simply. Admit more students and enlarge class sizes. That improves access. More students are getting an education. It improves affordability because the more students per faculty, the lower the faculty costs per student. And yet it also increases revenue because there are more students there. And those revenues can be used to improve quality, for example, retaining and hiring even better faculty. One conceptually simple step, three kinds of outcomes. And I label that threefold gains to distinguish it from, let's say, triple gains or something else that would suggest that some gain has been multiplied. Today, however, things have changed. Regional accreditors are not the only ones who would say that an institution's quality depends, at least to some degree, on what it is that students are actually learning. Back in 2016, when I formally got started on this research, that was the question that I had in mind. Is it possible for institutions to make threefold gains in some conceptually describable way? If so, where were they? How'd they done it? And of great interest to me, how did they develop the capacity to improve quality, access, and affordability at the same time? I was pretty sure it wouldn't be easy. The good news was that I found first one institution and then others. I ended up in the book doing detailed case histories of these six. And today I'm going to talk mainly about what I learned from the four that are bold-faced, simply because those four institutions had been around for a long time before they began developing the capacity to make threefold gains. The other two were founded specifically to try to set high watermarks in quality, access, and affordability. So how are they doing it? I'm going to oversimplify and tell you only part of it, but I think it's the single most important part. Over the years, at each of these institutions, their students engage in a series of activities that motivate them to invest an unusual degree of thought and effort in a project. And that doing that project usually requires many kinds of interpersonal interactions. often with a variety of people from different backgrounds and with different assumptions. AAC&U and NESE some years back created a list of such activities, and they called them high impact practices, or HIPs. And here the 12 of them are. There's a footnote there, a couple footnotes in case you'd like to look into them further. And it's easy to find more just by doing a library search or using Google Scholar. So what do HIPs have to do with threefold gains? Well, it turns out from research that's been done on them that they can improve learning for all the students they engage. And this is especially true if the students engage in a series of HIPs, maybe one a year. And these HIPs are even more effective for students from previously underserved groups, African American students, for example, Hispanic students. I suspect older learners, so I'm not sure I could put my fingers on that evidence, but I wouldn't be surprised. So while all students make significant gains beyond what they could have done by not engaging in HIPs, the students from underserved groups gain even more. So these are gains in quality and equitable access, twofold gains, if you will. Now, as quality improves, so does retention, graduation rates, and speed to graduation, again, especially for the students from those underserved groups. And when that happens, this saves the student time and money. They can graduate sooner. Saves the institution time and money. They don't have to teach as many classes for that student to graduate. Meanwhile, it increases institutional revenue. The tuition payments are coming in, not stopping when a student drops out, but continuing until they complete. And it improves the lifetime earnings of graduates because they begin to earn those college level salaries 6 to 12 months earlier than they would have, which enlarges their useful lifetime in doing work. To do this, you need educational strategies that sustain one another. If you take another look at those HIPs, you can imagine that they help each other. For example, writing intensive courses would help students do better with an e-portfolio. Both of them would help students do better with capstone courses. And the curriculum can also help if it's developing students' knowledge and capabilities so that when they take on one of these projects, they can do exceptionally well. It helps to have a lot of peer learning going on, and student peer assistance can be helpful with that. Now, I said I was going to keep this simple, so let me just stop there. But those kinds of mutually supportive educational strategies, while important, are not sufficient. Most institutions also need to make some changes in themselves as organizations so that they're more supportive for these more learning-centered educational practices. One small example, suppose that all the students in the institution will at least once engage in some kind of undergraduate research or service learning or internship off campus. Where are they all going to find such destinations? It helps for the institution to have an office that helps line up and sustain a network of such sites so that they can be used year after year after year without the sites feeling exploited and without the students running out of opportunities to do this kind of work. It also helps to realign some of the institution's interactions with its wider world. Now, one kind of interaction between an institution and its wider world is the accreditation process. Some of the institutions that I studied took advantage of accreditation requirements, regional accreditation requirements, to do major projects that were aimed precisely at developing some element of this growing set of educational and organizational initiatives that are supporting each other. Eventually, there can be a constellation of such institutional attributes and recent initiatives that bit by bit grow. This is what it looked like at Georgia State. If you look at the left-hand side of the graph, 2003, at that time, Georgia State's graduation rate, 6-year graduation rate, was 32%. That means that 32% of the students who entered in 1997 had graduated from Georgia State by 2003. The figure, by the way, was much lower for African American students. In fact, only about half of the African American students who started in 1997 made it to their sophomore years. At this point, Georgia State began taking some major steps to try to do something about it. They began making large-scale use of freshman learning communities, which are a high-impact practice. They redesigned introductory math courses. They used supplemental instruction, which is another research-proven technique for helping all kinds of students do better. At the same time, they made an organizational change. They began centralizing their collection of data from different sources throughout the institution so that it could be used in combination to answer questions about student success. Now, at the time, these were not seen as being particularly related to one another, although some of them did have to do with problems that were experienced in retention through the freshman year. It was only a little bit later, around 2008, when Georgia State, looking backward, realized that they had made a significant amount of progress in a short period of time in their graduation rates. They needed to make more, and that these pieces that had been seen separately could be seen together as a constellation of elements that were reinforcing each other. And at that point, Georgia State began consciously to develop more and more elements of this constellation, and the graduation rates continued to increase. By 2019, there were 55% of students who entered 6 years earlier who had graduated with bachelor's degrees from Georgia State. More encouragingly, by this time, a new kind of data was available, and that was, of those students who had entered 6 years earlier, how many of them had gotten bachelor's degrees from somewhere by 2019? And the answer was about 85%. 85% of the white students, 85% of the African American students had gotten bachelor's degrees by 6 years after entering Georgia State. And that 55%, the differences between white students and African American students were very small. And by this time, they had educational strategies, more and more, that were reinforcing each other, a growing array of organizational foundations that had been aligned to support those educational strategies, and a variety of kinds of wider world interactions that did so too. For example, the College to Career initiative was putting together information from outside the institution about careers and using that to influence the student experience right back to the first term of freshman year. So as you can see, there's an institutional journey that has at least two major parts, maybe three. There are in the preliminary phase, the institution may be like your own, for example, doing this, doing that, trying to tackle some problems of quality or access or affordability, or maybe two or three in combination. But the initiatives are often seen as unrelated to one another. At a certain point, if there's been some success, and if the needle is beginning to move, especially on some outcomes measures, people in the institution may come to believe that it's important to see these in combination, and that they can take on more significant goals to significantly improve the outcomes of an education, bachelor's degree, master's degree at that institution, and at the same time, the equity of access to that program, and at the same time, the affordability of that program, the affordability for students to take it, the affordability of the institution to offer it. It's particularly important at this moment when, I'd say moment, but it can take several years, the transition, that organizational foundations, like, for example, the faculty reward system or how faculty are recruited, may come to be seen as possible of change within reach, that if the stakes are this high and it matters to the whole institution, shouldn't we at least take a look at whether it's possible to realign some of these organizational foundations? Foundations that had a few years ago seemed utterly unchangeable facts of institutional life. After all, if you're looking at just one initiative, it rarely supplies the rationale to make a change in the institution's public image. But when When outcomes are beginning to improve and when larger issues are seen to be at stake, a lot of things come into play suddenly as being, well, maybe we could look at that. Maybe we could make a change like that. So think about your own institution in this light. Where are you? Have any initiatives been made, or there's some institutional attributes which are already appropriate if they were combined with other elements to improve quality of learning at your institution, equity of access, affordability? Are some of them operating at scale already? Are some of them there but still embryonic? Where are you? Where might you go? So this is my book, Pursuing Quality, Access, and Affordability, a Field Guide to Improving Higher Education. That URL will take you to the Stylus webpage. Stylus is the publisher, where you can find the complete table of contents, endorsements, free access to the first chapter, which contains research on why it's so urgent for institutions to improve quality, access, and affordability today. If you want the Kindle version, you can get that from Amazon. And you can see the review and some an interview in Inside Higher Education. And I absolutely invite you to get in touch. Email me at airmansteve@gmail.com if you'd like to talk about any of these issues. I've spent literally my whole life in doing the research that's led up to this book. In fact, in the foreword, I try to describe how some of those earlier pieces of work have led into this. I'm nearing the end of my career, and I very much want to see this book have as much benefit to the people I've worked with over the years as possible. Thanks very much for watching the video.